Sammy's picture, The Naked Kiss, opened downtown Los Angeles on Broadway at one of the old theaters down there that used to show three big hits for 50 cents. And believe it or not, that was the LA premiere of The Naked Kiss. And it was one of those theaters where during the movie, you know, you hear people snoring, you hear bottles or cans roll down the cement floor. And yet when that picture started and that opening scene happened and Constance Towers is swinging and that wig eventually comes off, you know, it was just so dramatic that you could just feel it in that theater. And as the scene ended, this guy in the back went, "What the fuck?" Which was just how I felt, you know, in a great way. I was now doing Cinema Magazine as the editor. And when the magazine eventually came out, Stanley Cortez, who had shot the picture and also shot Shock Corridor for Sammy, called me up and said he'd read it and what a good piece he thought it was, and said, "Would you like to meet Sam Fuller?" And I said, "Great." And so he arranged it and I got to know him, and he just loved, I think, my enthusiasm, not just for his work, but for the work of John Ford, whom he loved, and also my enthusiasm for movies in general.
You know, Reader's Digest used to have a feature, and it was the most unforgettable person I ever met. And everybody that met Sam Fuller thought that about him. He was the most wonderful, energetic, loquacious guy that you could imagine. I mean, he would just never stop telling you a story. He always had a yarn. He always wanted you to share his enthusiasm for whatever was on his mind. And he would grab your arm, you know, just to make sure your attention wasn't drifting. And he wanted to make sure you understood how much he cared. And he had a very gruff exterior, but he was such a pussycat. He was so sweet.
Sam, his crime reporting and his experience in World War II taught him that we are predatory and we're animals and we're primitive. And some critics have called Sam an authentic American primitive. They mean it in the good sense. The German expression, "you are, Urmensch," you know, when you go back to the origin. But Sam was actually much more sophisticated in his approach to filmmaking and writing. And it wasn't him who was primitive. He deconstructed. Like Jacques Derrida, you know, he said in the war, a soldier in the trenches does not close his eyes and think of his sweetheart or his mother back home. He thinks of a trench foot, wet socks. He thinks of the immediate and how to survive. And he based all of his ethics on how do people survive. What do they do? You know, like in Pick Up on South Street, we've got a pickpocket. And he survives through pickpocketing in the metro, in the subway. He was one of the few directors who was a real auteur, you know. But when something came along like White Dog, oh, he said, that's an explosive, you know, subject matter. And I can do a lot with that yarn. He called stories yarn. Sam was a very unpretentious man. He was very self-effacing and unpretentious. His only luxury was lighting a cigar and smoking his cigars, you know. Otherwise, he was a very humble man. But when he talked about war, he got so incensed or about certain, you know, subject matters that he could get right into your face, you know.
The movie is based on a short story that appeared in Life magazine and was followed by a novel of the same name a month later. And this was written by Roman Gary. And Sam Fuller knew Roman Gary because Roman Gary was the French consul in LA for about 5 years. Sammy made a movie called China Gate, and it has a prologue on it about the French involvement in Indonesia, and it's not very flattering to the French, as well it shouldn't be. And Roman Gary contacted him and tried to get him to get rid of that prologue and change it. And of course, Sam refused because, you know, Sam was, I can't change history, kid. And they became very close friends.
And he even offered Sam another one of his books. I think it was Roots of Heaven, to make into a movie. And then later on, Roman Gary married Jean Seberg, and they divorced. And Jean Seberg died in 1978 at the age of 38, and he committed suicide 2 years later. He was only 60 years old. It's a very sad story. Not only the story of White Dog, and Sam dedicates the film to Roman Gary.
A few years after I'd stopped doing the magazine and was trying to get things of my own together, and in fact I'd made a extremely low budget movie, I wrote a screenplay called The Silent Partner, and wanted to direct it, you know, but I couldn't get it together right away. But Bob Evans read it, and he hired me to adapt Romain Gary's White Dog. And this was when Evans was stepping down from head of Paramount and becoming a producer. And his plan was that Roman Polanski was going to direct it. Well, as a screenwriter, you know, this was a fantastic opportunity. I was, you know, just so excited because I was a fan of Polanski. A couple of years went by and that wasn't in the cards. And I immediately tried to actually get the script to try and direct it myself. I couldn't sell myself to them. And some time went by, and they had a couple of other writers come in and take a different approach, more of an exploitational horror movie approach. Then I got a call from Don Simpson, who was now head of production at Paramount. And he had reactivated it again. They'd been through a couple of different writers I knew and some different drafts. And he called me up and said they were serious, they wanted to make it. Would they let me direct it? No. But would I come in and do a rewrite? And they had a director in mind. And I said, but you know, who you should think about is Sam Fuller. A, he's a great director, and B, he's very familiar with his material, because when I was writing my original draft, I talked to Sammy about it and knew that Sammy was a friend of Romain Gary, who wrote the original novella, and he knew the material very well.
I mean, Sam had a history of making these anti-racist movies. I mean, you look at Chuck Carter, and you look at The Crimson Kimono, and you look at Run of the Arrow, and I mean, strong anti-racist statements. And I thought, well, the only way to redeem this project is probably get somebody like Sam Fuller on it. I don't think anybody at Paramount knew Sam Fuller or his work. They did know The Big Red One. They, you know, Jeffrey maybe had seen the picture, and they certainly knew that it had gotten good reviews and it was a respectable, you know, top line, you know, movie. And so he said, well, that's could be okay with us. Why don't you and Don Simpson go talk to Fuller and see if he's interested?
What I didn't say to Don, but that I, of course, knew, was that Sammy needed a job, and I thought would love this opportunity. Day went by, called me back again and said, would you rewrite it with him? And I said, Don, this is Sam Fuller. You know, he doesn't collaborate. He's what he is. He's Sam Fuller. He writes and directs. And we would like you to work with him, because we think that'll be a good combination, and it'll maybe make Sam a little more contemporary than he might otherwise be, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, if Sammy will accept me, I'd love to participate.
So Sam was in Argentina promoting The Big Red One, the old version, 1980 version. And when on a Friday I was expecting him back, he was on the plane when a wonderful producer, John Davison, called and said, would he be interested in a movie? We have a novel by Roman Gary called White Dog. I said, holy smoke, like Sam always says, holy smoke, but I didn't have a cigar. And I said, I know that. And John Davison and Don Simpson came the next day, and in pouring rain to offer Sam the movie. And Sam was so, he hadn't slept, he was jet lagged, he was so excited. I had to send him to get a shot of whiskey for our guests on a Saturday morning.
One of the reasons that it was very important to make a deal with Sam Fuller was that he could write this very fast. I think I gave him 10 days to write the screenplay. And then he had about another 3 or 4 weeks to prep the entire picture because there was a writer's strike coming up and a Directors Guild strike coming up. Now, history repeating itself, the Writers Guild strike happened and the Directors Guild strike didn't. So there was absolutely no time. I had no input into the script. I didn't need it because I had Sam Fuller. And Sam Fuller, I know, is going to sit down and write something you could make and be proud of.
I brought a typing table and my old Royal upright typewriter, which happened to be the mirror image of Sammy's. It was just coincidence. This was the typewriter I had learned to type on. That was my grandmother's originally, and I was just attached to it. It was the typewriter I used. So I brought that typewriter and typing table up to the house, to shack number 3 now, up on Woodrow Wilson, and set it up. Sammy had this great old roll-top desk with a very high back on it, and he of course was on the one side of it, and I set my typewriter table and typewriter on the other side. So to see each other, I would have to stand up and you know, look over at him, and we went to work, and we did this very brief but dense outline, and Sammy then typed it up. Sammy was a great typist. You know, it was the hunt and peck method, but he was very fast and very accurate. And these pages are single spaced, and so it's dense. So we did the outline, and then we started to write.
Curtis, Hanson, and Sam worked like 24 hours a day uninterruptedly on the story. It was very intense. He came and he left in the middle of the night, Curtis.
And I believe that we did the whole script in 3 weeks. And it was, you know, 7 days a week, not working early in the morning, but working very, very late at night. And some of the nights, I in fact slept up at the house. Our method was that with each scene, I would go first on one side of the room, and I would type a draft of the scene, and then I would give it to Sammy, and then he would go to work on that scene while I then worked on the next scene. And at a certain point he'd go, you know, "My boy, come here," and I would get up and walk around his desk, and we had a chair over where I could sit facing him across the typewriter, and he'd have a cigar, and if it wasn't lit, he'd light it, and he would then read me the rewrite of my scene. The rewrite of my draft of our scene. And you know, and I did my best to have absolutely no ego about it and just enjoy the performance that Sammy did, and performance it was, as he read every part. And then we would talk about the scene and what I liked, didn't like, what he felt. And then he would take the scene and write on it the notes, and then he would retype it, and that retype was it. You know, again, he'd call me over and read it, but invariably that was it. This was definitely, I was there to serve Sam, and happily so. You know, I mean, that was the whole idea, and I felt privileged and excited to be there and both enjoy it, learn from it, and be part of a Sam Fuller movie. You know, it was great, and it was a wonderful, not only working experience, but in fact a great life experience.
So Michael Eisner always thought of this as Jaws on pause. In other words, an exploitation movie about a dog that attacks black people. This was not a good idea for a movie. If you remove the racial component, you could make a fine movie about a dog going around attacking people. Because this was a few years before Cujo, which was a hit. And if you wanted to make a quality film out of it, then the racial angle was great. You're making an art film. and it's going to be a serious movie about race relations in America. And I thought with Sam Fuller on board, that's what we would be getting. I believe it's what we got, is a serious art film about race in America.
That's a white dog.
Of course he's a white dog.
I don't mean his color. He's going to attack and kill black people.
That's crazy. I don't believe that.
What I loved about the possibility of White Dog was the metaphor, this beautiful metaphor of a dog, you know, and showing man's best friend can be polluted by racism, and showing that racism, in fact, is not a natural thing, but is a taught thing. And what better metaphor for that than teaching man's best friend? I also very much like the idea of having the lead human, this young actress, be someone who's not terribly concerned about racism, not somebody who even thinks about it. It's not part of her daily existence. But what happens is, through the accident of hitting this dog with her car, she does the human thing, which is to take the dog and try and have it taken care of. And then when the dog, they can't find the owner of the dog, she adopts it and then falls in love, in a sense, with the dog. Then through this series of horrifying events, discovers the truth of the dog. And then she wants to cure the dog. It's not that she's an activist wanting to attack racism, but she wants to cure the dog because she loves the dog and doesn't want it to be put to sleep.
Sam, however, was much more interested in the character of Keyes. That became the focus of his script and his film. Curtis really had more of a Hollywood story, a story of an actress. And the original Roman Gary story ended with Keyes retraining the dog to attack white people. And this was also in Curtis's draft. And Sam completely jettisoned that. In fact, he said at several occasions in interviews he thought that was racist.
The outcome is kind of the same, in that the dog gets just so twisted in its head that it ends up in that place anyway, but not through the deliberate action of the dog trainer.
He really thought that through education, that most people could be educated to become tolerant and understand the other better, the other person's history, the other person's pain, the other person's shortcomings, and that we could really overcome racism that way.
He really taught through his movies. He approached them as a teacher. And I remember I took his 16 millimeter print of Park Row. My father was a school teacher, and I took his print of Park Row out and showed it to a double class of my dad's once. And Sammy was so thrilled to loan me that print and wanted to know just how it went, because Sammy loved the capacity that people have to learn and improve themselves. And he loved people that took on the responsibility of trying to guide and help people along that path. And I think Sammy was most drawn to the character of the dog trainer, of Keyes, because he saw in him the possibility of having a man be at the center of this racial question, who was a scientist on the one hand, and also a teacher who would, in a sense, cure this dog by re-teaching.
He just killed a man. There is no way you can cure that dog. I want you to shoot him now before he kills more blacks.
So you finally joined the club? A club of horrified people who raise holy hell about that disease, that racist hate, but do absolutely nothing to stamp it out. That dog is the only weapon we have, at least, to remove a part of it.
Sam's first choice for the role of Julie was Jodie Foster, and she was not available. And then there was a little pencil note next to it that said, but he'd like to meet with Kathleen Quinlan. And his first choice for keys, he said, was my old friend Billy D. Williams. And his first choice for Carruthers was Lee Marvin. And he also, if he couldn't get Marvin, he said, well, if he could get Richard Widmark or Burt Lancaster or Kirk Douglas, they would be good. I think actually I suggested Burl Ives. Burl Ives was a great guy to work with. He was so sweet. Unfortunately, he was getting kind of old and couldn't remember all the dialogue. And so I ended up, you know, making cue cards and would hold them up. And Sammy had this very elaborate master worked out with Burl Ives and like 4 pages of dialogue. And he had to break it up because even they're just, Burl couldn't do it and I couldn't maneuver the cue cards well enough, I think, to have that work. But Sammy was very accommodating to Burl, and Burl, I think, had a good time.
During the shooting, I naturally took advantage of the opportunity to go and hang out on the set and watch Sammy at work and, you know, chat with him occasionally. And he'd rib me once in a while and say, you know, what are you doing? You should be working. You should be working. And but it was great to watch him and watch the speed and dexterity with which he operated and the certainty. You know, Sammy was not the kind of director who would say to a DP, I want the camera here and I want a 27 on it or whatever. He didn't talk that way, nor would he to his collaborator. But he was extremely specific, and then he'd say, we see his face. And then he goes to here and so forth. And then the DP would line up the shot. And it just moved quick all the time.
Carl Miller was training the dogs. And Carl was a great animal trainer. And in fact, he did both Babe pictures, which both were wonderful. And he did the Beethoven movies. And Carl had 5 dogs. And the 2 main dogs were Folsom and Hans. And they were the star dogs. And then there were 3 stunt dogs. And those dogs were old guard dogs. And so they never worked those dogs with the actors. And they were always worked without actors. Also on the picture, before I was on it, was the production designer, Brian Eatwell, who was a really talented guy who started as a set designer on the wonderful Robert Fuss Dr. Phibes movies. And he did such pictures as Walkabout and The 3 Musketeers and 4 Musketeers and The Man Who Fell to Earth. Just very talented guy. When Sammy started talking about this movie, he said, yeah, and the dog and the man, and they're like gladiators. And an image obviously was conjured in his mind of a big cage where gladiatorial combat between man and dog could be staged. And so he had Brian built this giant cage at a place called the Wildlife Way Station, which was a shelter for battered, abused, abandoned animals run by a lady by the name of Martine Collette. And one of the nice things that the film accomplished is we built some buildings at the Wildlife Way Station. We built Ives's office, and we built the veterinary clinic, Keyes's house, and built the cage, which became an aviary, and all this was built to code. So Martine got to keep these buildings, and they're still out there and still being used.
Hi. Can I help you?
Are you Mrs. Carruthers?
No, I'm Martine Dawson.
I'm looking for Mr. Carruthers.
Across the road, little green house on your left-hand side.
Thanks.
In some ways, One of the turning points of the movie is the scene where the dog chases the black man, follows him into the church and attacks him there. The guilt that it stirs up in Julie, Carruthers, and Keyes, because they are deep into what they're doing, and one could say that they were complicit in that attack, and they keep it secret in order to go on with their enterprise, which is, needless to say, a decision that is provocative.
We all know that in the long run, what we're doing with this dog is proper. It's right. It's humane. You know, the officials, they won't understand that.
I remember, it's funny, as we were in the midst of writing that scene, Sammy talked about this window that would be there, and that the camera would pan up off the attack going on to this stained glass window of St. Francis of Assisi.
And one of the probably few bones of contention between Curtis Hanson and Sam Fuller is that Curtis felt that having the man tracked down and killed in a church under the stained glass window of St. Francis of Assisi was just too much. It was just one step beyond, what he would have done, let's say.
I said something, I made a comment to Sammy, like, the window worried me a little bit, because I thought it might be just, hitting it too hard in a way that would take people out of it, take people out of everything else that was going on in the scene. And Christa heard that comment and started repeating it later, and told John about how I didn't want the scene in the church, and I didn't, which is nonsense, of course, but it got its little life,
But Curtis lost that battle, and here is the stained glass window which Sam had trucked from Paramount at the end of the production and installed in his house, and that's where we sit now. It was believed at the time that dogs only saw in black and white. And in fact, there's a line in the movie where Paul Winfield says, dogs live in a black and white world, but they live it visually, not racially. And so he had the idea, he wanted to have all the dog POVs in black and white. And I had the idea that it would be some sort of special effect desaturation kind of thing. And we hired Robert Blaylock, who had a company called Paraxis, who was a special effects guy, and in fact did the optical work on the original Star Wars, and had him do a number of tests. And we started cutting these tests into the work print, and it was just too distracting. There might have been a way to do it with a little more post-production and a little more finesse, but where we were at, it wasn't a good idea. So Sam immediately wanted to scrap it as soon as he was seeing what the edited version would look like.
In terms of, again, making the dog one of the leading characters in the movie, one wanted to get into the dog's head as best one could, and that's why there's so much of the dog watching, and in terms of the relationship with the girl, that you feel he's actually a partner in it, as opposed to just a dog over in the corner. Sammy loved everything that I ever had to say about the truth of having a dog, and the truth of the attachment that one would feel, and also the behavioral things. I mean, for instance, the little details of how you give a dog medicine, how you get the pill down the throat, the dog going after the girl's underwear, which Sammy thought was the funniest thing he'd ever heard, and the drama of giving a dog a bath in the tub.
When we were shooting this picture, it was the summer, and it was very warm in LA, out in the valley, and Paul Winfield had this giant protective suit on, all this padding, and he would wrestle these dogs for hours in the sun while Sammy got his shots. And he was a real trooper. I'll tell you, he did all his own stunt work. Sammy was the only other person on the set that was completely unaffected by the heat. He would go charging up a hill saying, we got a great overhead up here. Go a great, come on, you know? And it was like, you know, San Juan Hill. I mean, you'd have to go running after this guy in 102-degree heat up this huge hill so he could find a place to put the camera. He was absolutely irrepressible. He had an optimism that was just completely contagious, no matter whatever went wrong on the set. Don't worry, kid. I know what to do. I can fix it. And he would get in the car in the morning and I'd ride out with him. And he would describe every shot he wanted to do in the day. And he would get so excited about it. And sometimes he never did those shots. He'd come up with new shots he was excited about in the middle of the day and probably forgot what he said in the morning on the way out there. But it was always something visually interesting and always in the service of the emotion of the story.
Sam didn't do research. He knew what he knew in terms of attack dogs from his war experiences, and had, I believe, shared some of that with Romain Gary when he was writing his piece.
So Roman Gary would stop by the house and Sammy would tell him stories, because Sammy told everybody stories. He was a great storyteller. Yarns, as he used to call them. And one of the yarns he told Roman was the story of the white dog of Tunisia. And this was a story about a dog that the Germans used against American soldiers in World War II. And in North Africa, the Germans had these Doberman pinschers, which were trained by smell to differentiate between the German soldiers and the American soldiers. And evidently they could do this because of the leather the Germans wore and the cloth the Americans wore, plus the diet of each groups of people. And they painted these dogs white. And when the soldiers would go on patrol, they would see this white dog. And about 20 minutes later, they would start getting artillery fire in their position. And what this dog did is he would run up the hill, and because he was painted white, there was a spotter watching him, and he would point at where the American soldiers were, and then the Germans launched an artillery attack. And evidently this story held great fascination for both Sam and Roman Gary.
Yeah, I remember Sammy describing how when the dog turned and at the end would try to attack Julie and Carruthers, that the dog had gone insane, and had gone insane because of being pushed one way and then pulled another way. And I was excited, seeing Sammy's excitement, because I naturally thought of Shock Corridor and the insanity in that, and how Sammy always looked at human behavior as being on one side or the other of insanity. And that's what interested him, you know, was that this beautiful creature had been so polluted by the ugliness of racism that it had been driven insane at the end. That was much more interesting to Sammy than the politics of the trainer as he was in Romain Gary's original book.
We got a lot of notes from studio executives trying to eliminate a lot of the style from the picture. They didn't like Sam's long tracking shots. They wanted them eliminated or shortened. They didn't like intercutting of the animal eyes and the human eyes. They didn't like extreme close-ups. They didn't like the dog POVs because they were, by necessity, low angles. They just didn't like anything that was stylish about the picture. And the only thing that really saved Sam was the fact that he didn't do a lot of coverage. And he couldn't eliminate all this stuff without, and still have the picture make sense.
Well, Sammy had never heard of anything. I mean, Sammy's not one to take notes lightly in any event. You know, I remember Sammy's reaction to somebody saying that they had an idea was, Sammy would listen to the idea and go, "That's a great idea. You should use it when you make your movie." But there was this specter of notes and the specter of a company that was soliciting notes that sort of hung over the latter part of the production.
They never really understood Sam or his movies. And when they met with Sam, I think they were so intimidated by him that they just didn't want to deal with him anyway, you know. So they would send memos.
Sam was very happy with everything, except when the picture was finished. Sam was cutting it, and all of a sudden word was getting around that Sam had made a racist film. I mean, that was a shock. Bad rumors started. We didn't know where they came from, but Sam was so confident that everybody would see that it's an anti-racist film, so obvious.
You go back and think about Sammy's movies and think about them through the prism of racism, and it's amazing how consistently he dealt with that subject and dealt with race as part of American society, sometimes in a kind of in-your-face way like Shock Corridor, where you have the insane black patient who thinks he's part of the Ku Klux Klan.
Witness number 2.
Keep our schools white!
Keep them white. That's right. Keep them white.
I'm against Catholics!
Hallelujah, man. Hallelujah.
Against Jews!
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Against niggers!
The Naked Kiss, where you have this hypocritical society of adults, and yet when you see the innocent society of the children, it's a multiracial society of children.
Tell me why, Mommy dear, are there tears in your eyes?
I mean, almost every movie he made at least touches on it, sometimes deals with it in a much more depthy way.
He even made a film about a Japanese American, and it's a Japanese American that is the racist. He talks about reversed racism. He tells the story about a white man and a Japanese American who fall in love with the same girl in the crimson kimono in 1959. And reverse racism exists as well. You know, and I think racism in general, whether it's pure racism, reversed racism, is one of the greatest evils of our civilization. If you can call it, one day we can call it a civilization.
And for Sammy to be tainted by these charges of having created a racist work was just tragic, and I know very hurtful to him, not just professionally, but personally, and to all who cared about him.
The world premiere of the picture was at the Cinémathèque Française in June of 1982. And it went into release in France in July of '82, the following month. And it got just the best reviews you can imagine. It was the best reviewed film I ever worked on. And did good business in France. Not outstanding, but very solid. Ran a long time. They made a nice profit on it, the French distributor.
The picture just kind of went into that limbo, and then eventually opened in Europe to some very good reviews in some places and some very good business. It's funny, sitting down and pulling out the file for this to sort of prep myself slightly and refresh my memory on some of the dates. I pulled out the file, and there in the file I found not only the ad for the sneak preview in Seattle that I had no idea I kept, but also some letters that I had written under pseudonyms to the LA Times, which once I saw it, I went, oh, I did that. And there, in fact, not only was my draft of the letter there, but also the issue of the LA Times where they printed both of these letters. I pretend that I saw the movie in Paris, and I'm taking issue with the LA Times writer who said the business was not good. And I describe how brisk the business was. Well, of course, Sammy, who was now in Paris, was my source for how the business was. So I guess I could say I collaborated with Sammy on the letter. And then, of course, the history of what happened after is fairly well known. That there was a sneak preview up in Seattle, which Sam went to, I went to. It had an ad in the paper advertising it as kind of a horror movie, and very few people came. It was kind of a non-event. I think Paramount actually felt that there wasn't a lot of financial upside to the movie. That, you know, they had harbored this thought over the latter years that the picture could really play as a sort of exploitation horror movie. That, of course, was not what Sammy wanted to make, and that's not what the movie is. But I think this preview in Seattle showed that maybe there wasn't even a market for that either, with the dog at the center of. That evening, we went out for drinks afterwards, and then the trek back, it was depressing because you could just feel that the studio didn't know what to do with the movie, and that there was not going to be support there. And I know Sammy could just feel it slipping away. The fact that this turned out to be Sam's swan song in Hollywood was just so sad, and you know, it makes me feel that this project was just sort of cursed from the beginning.
The only, in fact, the only thing that's kind of heartbreaking about the whole White Dog thing is that what it did to Sam. You know, he was just so upset by the treatment of his film that, well, you know, he moved to France. And I'm sure he had a great time in France, though, and it was much loved in France. But it broke his heart.
But it's still, look, the film business is called a business. And people have to be realistic. And Sam was always very realistic about the film business. You know, he still went ahead and did what he wanted, more or less, if he could do it. But it's a business, it's box office, you know. And in the 50s, he could do much more controversial films than in 1982. That's strange. You know, The Steel Helmet, where a prisoner of war tells the black medic, why are you fighting for the United States for? You can't even sit on the bus. Well, you know, Sam got on the blacklist of Edgar Hoover, but he won the Silver Star, the Purple Heart. He was a good American citizen. It was shocking at the time, and thank God Sam had a good international reputation, and he got to do a film in Paris, France. You know, Sam was a compulsive worker, and I have a lot of material that he wrote, but I don't want to give it to anybody unless I really feel the person is worthy of Sam's, you know, talent. And he kept on writing, and so it wasn't a bad thing.
But Sammy just was indomitable. I mean, his enthusiasm for the work and his diligence and self-discipline were, again, just inspiring to see. Never bitter.
The picture was really rescued by Michael Schlesinger at Paramount Repertory. And he got Paramount to make a print and got it booked at Film Forum in New York City in 1991. And the picture got lovely reviews from Hoberman at the Village Voice, Maslin in the New York Times. Sammy was vindicated.
I see Sam's influence everywhere. So Sam is so much ahead of his time. And he paid for it, but, you know, life was stressful but interesting. Like there's a Chinese proverb, may we live in interesting times.
Marty Scorsese said in the introduction to The Third Face, Sam's autobiography, that if you don't like the films of Sam Fuller, you don't like movies, or at least you don't understand them. True enough.